The war between Ukraine and Russia severely connected the fateful partnerships of the Eastern European bloc. The endangerment of Russia's borders with Eastern Europe and the later spread of the war to much wider areas especially worried NATO member states. Moscow's invasion plan strengthened Poland's relations with Kiev, one of Ukraine's most important allies and neighbors. Poland is now trying to warn the wider world of the danger posed by Putin's Russia. This is not just a regional clash. Russia's war against Ukraine is a potential source of global fire. Polish President Andrzej Duda is very sensitive on this issue and does not hesitate to constantly state that he is completely against Russia and that they will continue to stand by Ukraine. The war in Ukraine has become a sudden impetus for the militarization and rearmament of the countries of the world. Poland is taking drastic measures to prevent Russian aggression and threats in Europe. Poland has sworn to build the largest army in Europe. It is preparing an army and an armored unit for this. Polish Defense Minister Mariusz Błaszczak announced plans to increase the country's army from 150,000 to 300,000 due to Russian aggression. Błaszczak stated that within 2 years the Polish army would become the strongest in Europe. Błaszczak added that Poland will soon receive dozens of US-made Abrams tanks. The government ordered 116-old M1a2 Abrams as a temporary measure to replace tanks shipped to Ukraine. The minister stated that US M1 Abrams tanks will join the 18th Mechanized Division stationed in eastern Poland. So far, the first batch of M1a2 tanks has arrived in Poland. In addition, the Polish army will have added all 250 M1a2 Sep V3 tanks to its inventory in a few years. This tank army of Poland is supported by hundreds of fourth-generation K2 Panther tanks and K9 Howitzers and Polish Borsuk armored vehicles. Dozens of Himars and Patriot systems also support the Polish military. Poland received 32 Farads 35 fighter jets and at least 6 F-22 fighter jets from the USA. 96 RH-64 Apache helicopters purchased from the USA and 48 Fa-50 warplanes currently ordered from South Korea will provide strong air support to Poland. Militarization in eastern and northern Poland shows the strength of the alliance to Russia. The huge Polish army stationed at military bases near Kaliningrad and the Belarusian borders worries Putin deeply. While Poland sends a direct pushback to Russia with military measures, it also warns Russia with heavy sanctions. Poland is also very brave in the sanctions decisions taken against Russia. In fact, we saw the latest example of Poland's harsh stance on this issue much more clearly in the 11th package of sanctions planned to be held against Russia. Recently, Poland and the Baltic states are pushing for sanctions against Russia's nuclear power industry. The Warsaw government has called for Russian nuclear energy issues to be included in the European Union's 11th sanctions package. With this attitude, Poland almost warned the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, for the last time to give up this war because economic sanctions are one of the most important factors slowing down the Russians in this war. The EU's 11th sanctions package also seems to have a serious impact on Russia. The reason for this is that the sanctions package will contain heavy conditions. The relevant proposals in the text of the sanctions were presented in a document for EU countries. It touches upon measures against the Russian company Rosatom, including individual sanctions against the Russian administration, bans on new contracts, a ban on investment in Russia's nuclear sector, and a ban on imports of Russian enriched uranium. The 4 countries that have long advocated sanctions against Rosatom have proposed some exceptions and transition periods this time. For example, the termination of cooperation with Rosatom will be gradual and will not last more than 2 years. Hungary will be given a 9-year transitional period to complete the construction of the Pax nuclear power plant using Russian technology. The authors of the document state that some EU countries have already refused to cooperate with Russia in the nuclear field, citing the Czech Republic and Finland as an example. However, the necessity of obtaining the approval from the entire EU in order to impose sanctions on this area raises serious doubts. On the other hand, It should be noted that Hungary, France, and Bulgaria, which are highly dependent on Russian technology, have already expressed their opposition to the proposal. Brussels, on the other hand, believes that the 11th package of sanctions is aimed not at expanding the list of areas of the Russian economy that are subject to sanctions, but at preventing the already imposed restrictions from being circumvented. It should be noted that EU countries have previously discussed the inclusion of Rosatom in the 10th package of sanctions imposed on the Russian Federation. Lithuania and Poland insisted on this, but Hungary and Bulgaria blocked the proposal for sanctions against Russia. Ukraine has proposed to use its presence at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as a basis for imposing restrictions on the Russian state company. However, the restriction decision against Rosatom was not included in the 10th package of sanctions, as countries such as Hungary and Bulgaria refused. Arvydas Anušauskas, head of the Lithuanian Ministry of Defense, stated in an interview with Guildhall that the argument for sanctioning Rosatom was that this concern would produce nuclear weapons. Earlier, a member of the European Parliament from France, Raphael Glucksmann, chairman of the Special Committee on Foreign Intervention, reported that the entire military-industrial complex of the Russian Federation, of which Rosatom is also a part, should be under sanctions restrictions. The country that acted most courageously in this regard was Poland. Currently, the Warsaw government, since the beginning of the war, opposes the Russian occupation of Ukraine and supports economic sanctions against Moscow. Poland is literally leading the European response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as Europe found itself facing the continent's biggest armed clash since World War II. These efforts by the Polish leadership were seriously unique. Also, Poland's leading role in the European response to Putin's invasion reflects the country's extensive experience of Russian imperialism in both its Tsarist and Soviet forms. Since Poland's accession to the European Union in 2004, politicians in Warsaw have warned Europe of the growing threat posed by a resurgent and revisionist Russia. In addition, Poles were particularly concerned by signs of deepening ties between Berlin and Moscow and vocally opposed the German partnership in Russia's Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. Polish politicians have warned of this strategic energy infrastructure project that the second pipeline will allow Putin to bypass Ukraine's gas transit system and leave the whole of Europe vulnerable to Russian energy blackmail while subjecting the country to a full-scale invasion. Germany chose to ignore these warnings until the eve of Russia's February 2022 offensive. Moreover, Poland's prominent role in European security policy today is not entirely new. Since joining NATO in 1999, Poland has become a security element on the alliance's eastern flank. This was made possible thanks to Poland's strategic location and its extraordinary economic growth, which helped finance the rapid modernization and expansion of the country's armed forces. The Polish army, on the other hand, is currently shown as one of the most powerful armies in the world. Poland has in many ways set the standard for European humanitarian intervention in the Russian offensive against Ukraine since the invasion began. Poland has accepted more Ukrainian refugees than any other European country, while also providing a range of benefits such as access to health and education as well as employment opportunities. Over the past year, Polish authorities registered more than 1.5 million Ukrainian refugees. Poland is also one of the leading contributors of military aid to Ukraine at per capita rates. Poland sent more military aid to Ukraine than almost any other country except the Baltic states. This aid included hundreds of tanks and other important weapons. Poland plays a vital role in the logistical effort to deliver international military aid to Ukraine, enabling a global coalition of countries to supply the Ukrainian army with the weapons, equipment, and ammunition it needs. Most recently, the Warsaw government has decided to send 4 MiG fighter jets to the Ukrainian army, making it the first NATO country to send aircraft to Ukraine after Russia invaded Ukraine last year. Meanwhile, the Polish leadership continues to help fill the geopolitical vacuum created by the waning influence of Europe's traditionally dominant foreign policy powers. The Polish leadership of Europe's response to Putin's invasion also forges unprecedented ties between the Polish and Ukrainian people. These two nations have suffered from quarrels and historical conflicts in the past. However, they now find themselves united by the existential threat from today's Russia. Ukrainian opinion polls regularly show Poland as the country's closest partner, while the Kremlin cynically conceals its genocidal invasion of Ukraine with a language of Slavic brotherhood. It is Ukraine's Slavic neighbors in Poland who truly show fraternal support. This will shape the future geopolitical landscape of the region. When Russia is defeated, Ukraine will likely deepen its partnership with Poland to form a strong bloc in European politics. Together, the two nations will have an authoritative voice in the wider democratic world. In short, Europe's geopolitical center of gravity is shifting eastward, and Poland takes the lead. The war between Russia and Ukraine has entered a new phase. Every step is now much more important. Both states are racing against time. So why have we entered a critical period? Let's examine it together. Ukraine has a very harsh climate. Winter in Ukraine is very cold. There is heavy snowfall and ice everywhere. That's why it is impossible to conduct ground operations in winter. The Ukrainian army is trying to liberate more territory before the snowfall increases. That's why new operations are taking place every day. This is the most intense period of the war. The Ukrainian army is conducting counter operations on all fronts, trying to end the Russian occupation. The Ukrainian army managed to drive the Russian army east of the Dnipro River. In this way, it gained a great advantage due to the Ukrainian army's operations. The Russian army is forced to retreat. This is causing a big organizational problem in the Russian army. Russia is using state institutions in the occupied regions of Ukraine as military housing, but the energy connections to these buildings have been badly damaged by the war. Many buildings cannot be heated due to the explosions in the natural gas infrastructure. This puts the Russian military in a difficult situation. Before the cold weather, the Russian army could quickly change bases in many regions. But now the Russian army has to choose buildings without problems in the natural gas system. This crisis has caused great damage to the Russian army. The Russian army is in trouble with winter. And why is that? Let's take a closer look at what's going on. Since mid-November, it has been getting colder in Ukraine. The Russian soldiers sent to Ukraine had no clothes for winter because Russia believed that this war would be very short. But the historic resistance of the Ukrainian army ruined Russia's plans. The Russian army was not sufficiently prepared for winter conditions. The boots and coats in the warehouse of the Russian army were not enough for the soldiers, especially after 300,000 new soldiers were recruited after the mobilization decision. Supply problems increased even more. Dozens of soldiers fell ill at a base in Luhansk. A flu epidemic broke out among the soldiers. Some soldiers got so cold that they developed pneumonia. According to allegations in the Russian press, many soldiers were demobilized due to the aggravation of their illness. However, in addition to these problems, this issue triggered other crises in the Russian army. The actions taken by Russian military personnel significantly altered the trajectory of the conflict. The fact that the Russian soldiers were not provided with winter clothing infuriated them greatly. After numerous conversations with their superiors, the soldiers finally rebelled against their orders on their social media sites. Russian service members posted pictures of the worn and tattered boots that were provided to them. The Russians were incensed by this news because of these issues, which were experienced by the soldiers. Millions of Russian citizens voiced their disapproval of Putin's government. The Russian military ultimately came to the conclusion that those soldiers who used social media should be disciplined. On the other hand, this infuriated the Russian soldiers even further. A revolt was sparked by the Russian soldiers. The entire order of the Russian army was thrown into disarray as a result of this mutiny that was started by Russian soldiers. As the number of mutinies increased, some officers were relieved of their duties. The established system of command in the Russian army was thrown into disarray. The influence of winter on the battle did not end there, though, because they did not have enough guns and ammunition. The Russian army provided their soldiers with weaponry that were used during the time of the USSR. Rus covered the majority of these ancient weaponry. It was discovered that these weapons were not immune to water in any way. When it rains, these rusted firearms frequently become inoperable. The Russian military is notorious for its poor performance in battle. After being unable to successfully carry out land operations, the Russian army shifted its focus to air operations. However, Russian aircraft, including planes and helicopters, will not be able to fly if the weather is cold during the colder months. Russia is unable to make any headway toward its goals. The Ukrainian military is also carrying on with its operations in the hopes of achieving additional successes before the onset of the harsher winter weather. In this conflict, Russia intended to gain a significant advantage over the winter months, and they had a strategy to do it. So what exactly was Russia's strategy? Putin was aware that the winter would bring an end to this war. Because of this, he intended to conduct training for the 300,000 men he had recruited after the decision to mobilize during this time period. He intended to put a stop to the inexperience of the Russian army using this method. However, a significant number of the new troops who had been enlisted as a result of the mobilization decision deserted the army. Russian servicemen who were forcibly conscripted into the army as a result of the mobilization decision had raised the white flag and surrendered to the Ukrainian army. Another one of Putin's schemes involved cutting off Ukraine's access to electricity during the colder months. Throughout this conflict, the people of Ukraine have demonstrated remarkable unity. Russia intends to undermine the sense of community because if the people of Ukraine rebel, Zelensky will have a tough time performing his duties. On the other hand, the Ukrainian people continue to back both the army and Zelensky in order to foil Putin's schemes. Zelensky made a very significant action in order to acquire generators. Zelensky approached Western nations. As a result of this, a number of countries have shipped generators to Ukraine. The majority of Ukraine's energy requirements are currently being satisfied by these plants. The people of Ukraine are confident that they won't have any issues with their heating. Putin faces yet another obstacle during the colder months of the year. The resolution of this issue, according to the experts, will determine the outcome of the conflict. The waters may be reached from almost a full length of Russia's coastline. The winters are quite harsh in Russia's coastal regions and the oceans often ice over. Russia is unable to conduct business through certain ports utilizing the ports on the Black Sea. Is Russia's only option for preserving its economic connections with other countries. However, the Ukrainian military has made significant advancements in the Black Sea region. It is essential for Russia to continue its commercial endeavors in the Black Sea. Therefore, it is possible that it will have to endeavor strike a deal with Ukraine. If Russia does not give in to the demands of Ukraine, then Russia will not have unrestricted access to the Black Sea. The Bosphorus is the only connection that the Black Sea has to any other seas in the world. Turkey, a member of NATO, maintains control of the Bosphorus Strait. Turkey and Ukraine have the potential to push Russia to recede and utilize the Black Sea as an alternative. Experts predict that Russia will have to withdraw from even more territory in order to make use of the port located on the Black Sea. While winter is in effect, another decisive victory over Russia will have been achieved by the Ukrainian armed forces. In what ways, in your opinion, will winter affect this war? Do you anticipate any other consequences as a result of this? Do you believe that the upcoming winter will make things simpler for the Ukrainian army? What are your thoughts on the idea that Western countries will be providing generators to Ukraine? What do you believe the outcome of this conflict will be between Russia and Ukraine? The Ukrainians have been bracing in anticipation of a massive Russian attack the whole week because the Ukrainian main intelligence directorate leaked some information that suggested that Putin gave order to carry out a certain plan of strategic significance. As noted by the Ukrainian Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, A massive attack right now would make sense. We have just reached the first year of the war, Mark, so this would be perfect timing to make up for their last year's defeats and defuse the tension inside Russia. In fact, as alluded to in previous reports, the Russians have deployed a substantial number of forces to the north of Ukraine, in particular in the Bryansk or Yelkursk and Belgorod regions. What causes a lot of concern is that, according to many sources, the Russians are massing 700 aircraft for the attack. That is why many analysts started to researching the possibility of a new type of attack, one where the Russians are exploiting their air superiority to the fullest extent. The main idea is that the Russians launched several waves of swarms of drones to identify and destroy Ukrainian air defense. Combine it with a massive missile strike to take out Ukrainian logistics and command posts, and then they would conduct massive bombings of all Ukrainian defense systems and fortifications. Once the way is cleared, the Russians should be able to penetrate Ukrainian positions tens of kilometers deep and maybe even reach the Dnipro River. Ukrainian Air Force Command spokesman has recently commented on this scenario and essentially said that this would be a suicide operation which would end up with a virtually complete demilitarization of the Russian Air Force. He said that something like this could potentially happen on a smaller scale without Russian aviation reaching far behind the front line. But even in the case where the Russians are less aggressive, the Ukrainians have the means to inflict heavy losses to Russian aviation. First of all, when it comes to the preemptive drone attack, controllable small drones and plane-like UAVs can be easily intercepted. The Ukrainians have a lot of mobile electronic warfare systems that are designed for early detection of enemy UAVs and complete blocking of data control and navigation signals. One of the most popular systems used in Ukraine is Bukovel, which is capable of detecting aerial objects at a distance of up to 15 kilometers and blocking control at 10 kilometers. Secondly, the Ukrainians also have a more powerful system Enclave that has an effective reach of up to 40 kilometers. However, this one is stationary and is mainly used around the bases, so effective reconnaissance deep behind the front line is virtually impossible. And the only way to identify Ukrainian air defense is by sending uncontrollable, pre-programmed kamikaze drones here. The Russians would also have a ton of problems because, firstly, the Ukrainians have adapted to the constant drone strikes and have created mobile anti-drone units that are shutting them down from a machine gun. So only those drones that operate at a higher altitude have a great chance of becoming the target of and exposing Ukrainian air defense. The last option is to use a surveillance jet, a 52. This jet has an advanced radar that is capable to guide bombers to anti-aircraft weapons. This is also exactly the same aircraft that was destroyed in Belarus yesterday. It was revealed that local Belarusian anti-government activists had used modified commercial drones and ambushed them at Ulgi Air Base and fled the country. 2 drones managed to deliver a direct hit and destroyed a frontal and central parts of this $330 million aircraft. Now, this is an extremely important development because the Russians had only 6 such aircraft and now they are down to 5. In the case of a massive aerial attack, the Russians would need them to operate close to the fronts continuously. Its radar can reliably detect surface targets maximum at a range of 300 kilometers. So with each successful Russian step, they would be required to get closer and closer to the outer bulge to continue using their aviation effectively and increase the risk of losing this aircraft significantly. Since there are only 5 of those left, this option is off the shelf. Launching the production of this jets is impossible for the Russians. Even just buying this $330 million vehicles to increase the stock and mitigate the risk would eat up a considerable amount of the Russian military budget. But said an effector is for such high-end manufacturing is simply economically not feasible at this point. Economic isolation and sanctions pressure the Russians to ration their economic resources and avoid substantial impractical investments. But in the contemporary world, everything is interconnected. which is why this war causes a huge global economic turbulence. These recessions have already pushed people's savings to the brink, and any cash we hold is being eaten up by inflation, which is still rampant worldwide. Even putting money into stocks has become a game for the last year. But real assets can still gain and hold value in times like these. And real assets include not only gold and real estate, but also contemporary art. Historically, contemporary art had some stellar appreciation, outpacing not only inflation, but also the S&P 500 for the last 26 years. So if you want to find a better way to diversify your portfolio in these troubling times, you need to check out Masterworks. Masterworks is the leading art investment platform that allows you to acquire shares of paintings of renowned artists like Picasso. To date, Masterworks has sold 11 paintings, with each of them returning a profit to their investors. The last 3 specifically returned 10, 13, and 35% net as the economy heads downwards.